How do music, architecture, and neuroscience fuse to form a practice? And what is it like to create a research lab that thinks and unites individuals outside the box of contemporary craft? Moreover, how can designing extreme environments inspire how we conceive everyday space? And could adopting neuroscience be the answer for a universal architecture that improves cognitive performance, emotion, and our well-being? Today, on the third episode of Archfolio, is our guest, Federica Sanchez, to share with us her answers. Hello everyone, I'm your host Julian, and welcome to episode 3 of the Archfolio. A little over a month ago, a historic moment occurred at the Kennedy Space Center in Florida. On April 1st, the Orion spacecraft on Artemis II was launched into space, carrying 4 astronauts the furthest away from planet Earth in human history. Thousands of photos from the exterior of the spaceship flooded the internet, but it was one image that captured the attention and hearts of the world. A candid, hand-taken shot of the braided female astronaut Christina Koch from inside the vessel, looking down on Earth. The image sparked curiosity of how life was like inside the capsule, designed to support maximum functionality but also human comfort. A continuous architectural quest that served as the starting point for today's special guest, Federica Sanchez's talk at the conference Extreme Environments, hosted by Lombardini 22 and NE+AR last Thursday. Federica Sanchez is an architect and researcher specializing in the intersection of neuroscience and architectural design, having worked internationally in Japan and the Netherlands and Italy, where she started focusing on multisensory design and the neurological impact of built spaces. She collaborates with MySpace Lab at the Department of Clinical Neuroscience at the University of Lausanne and with CNR-IN in Parma to investigate the effects of architecture on human beings from a neurophysiological point of view. Federica is currently based at Lombardini 22 in Milan and recently co-founded with them in MySpace Lab NE+AR to research alongside architects, psychologists, and data scientists how to turn the intangibles of human experience into measurable neuroscientific insights that shape design strategies. And so it is with our utmost fascination and excitement that we welcome again Federica Sanchez. Welcome to the podcast.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Welcome. And how are you? How was it like to reunite with your friends at the conference? How was it like to see them?
Yeah, it was really exciting, also really intense, because all the speakers were coming from different countries. But besides that, I was really happy and really excited because it really felt like a multidisciplinary talk. All of us, we come from completely different disciplines and environments. So yeah, I'm really happy and really satisfied with the output.
Did they get to stay a little bit to see your projects, or were they in and then out the next day?
Yeah, they were out the next day. They're all very busy people, but we're always in contact. So
That's nice.
okay.
That's nice. Because you also went to Boston, no? To give a talk earlier this year?
Yeah, I went to Boston last October and last April to give 2 talks about these topics. So the discipline that I work with, that is neuroscience applied to architecture. And yeah, I was there at the Italian consulate.
All right.
Talk. Yeah.
Wow. You talked about the multidisciplinary convergence of so many individuals, and that also relates to your position in research because it converges neuroscience and architecture, which at first glance may seem distant, but in reality are so intercorrelated. How did you find your way into this mixture from when you started out as just an architecture undergrad at Politecnico? Was neuroscience always an interest? And did it grow into research then, or was it simply happenstance?
So I did my bachelor's in architecture at Politecnico di Milano. And then afterwards, I moved to the Netherlands to do my master's in landscape architecture at TU Delft.
Oh, okay.
And I was feeling like I was missing something, though. So I wasn't sure I wanted to become an architect. So yeah, also my parents were really worried about it. But so the interest in neuroscience started during my thesis at TU Delft. So I was finishing my master's in architecture, and I was at the point where I had to choose the thesis topic.
Mm-hmm.
And so one day my mother sent me this newspaper article, and she was really proud because they had interviewed her about the opening of one of the first Snuzzelen rooms in Tuscany. At the clinic where she was working. And she is a neurologist, and she has always worked with autism.
Mm-hmm.
And so she explained to me over the phone that these snoozelen rooms, I asked her, what are snoozelen rooms? She told me that they are multisensory rooms and they are used as a form of non-pharmacological therapy. So when the patients become very agitated or have a crisis, an alternative to give them medication is to bring them inside these spaces. And so the article had this photo of the room, and it really looked strange to me because it was different from any interior I had seen during my studies. So there were these colored lights, weird materials and shapes. And my first thought as an architect was like, but who designed this? And why does it look like this? Why those colors, those lights, those shapes? But then this means that architecture can heal. You can't heal from autism, but you can design a space so that it avoids the use of medication. So that moment for me was really an epiphany. And so then afterwards, I started researching and I discovered a field that is advancing incredibly fast thanks to the new technology that allow us to scientifically analyze how architectural components affect ourselves, humans. And so that became my thesis, and it
Okay, that
never
makes
stopped
sense.
from there.
So that's why the title was Healing Landscapes. Is
Yes.
because you were inspired by that healing aspect of the therapeutic rooms. That's so
Yeah.
fascinating. Wow. So really just from your mom, and
Yeah.
that was an epiphany.
It's her fault.
Wow. And like through this process, because then you had this interest in at first what was mostly healing, and then you kind of took a step back and you were like, what's the neurological aspect behind it or the neuroscientific understanding? How did you grow that into your profession? How did you maintain that interest when you started working or researching around the places you worked in around the world?
Yeah, so I trained as an architect, and for a long time I did what architects do. So I thought about space in terms of forms, light, materials, proportions, all the things that are usual. But I kept feeling like something was missing. So then the shift happened when I started looking at the intersection with neuroscience, reading and studying the research of different neuroscientists. But to become able to do this, I had to go back to study. So then I started a master's in neuroscience applied to architectural design. And studying was very useful, but I think that it wasn't enough.
Oh, okay. Interesting.
So I sort of recognized a similar logic in my own life outside of work, and more specifically with music.
Oh,
So,
I love that. I love music.
so a couple of years ago, I started listening and loving techno and electronic music,
Okay.
which I discovered living in the Netherlands. But at the same time, I also really love Gregorian chants, you know?
Oh. Mm-hmm.
And so I was wondering why, because they seemed to me to have nothing to do with each other. And then one day, when I was living already in Milan, I found a concert series at the auditorium di San Fedele here in Milano, where in the same season of concerts, they paired Arvo Part, who is an artist that does sacred minimalism and classical music,
Yeah.
together with a contemporary artist who also DJs, and he performed electronic and experimental music. So, thanks to this experience, it started making sense. What seemed a contradiction to me wasn't actually random, because if you think about it, both genres use the repetition as a device.
Mm-hmm.
So, it's a loop that becomes almost like a mantra, a
Mm-hmm.
sort of prayer that brings us into a state of attention, close to meditation, maybe. So, the music of a club and the music of the church are doing a similar thing to us through completely different surfaces, but there is a common structure. So what I have extracted from all this, from architectural training, the neuroscience studies, and even music, is that the most useful thing that you can do is refuse to stay inside your field's comfort zone. Not because crossing boundaries is interesting in itself, but because the problem you're trying to solve doesn't necessarily respect those boundaries. So, for example, the brain doesn't know it is in a building, it just responds. And if you want to understand that response, you have to be willing to go wherever it leads you.
That's gold. That's gold. I mean, yeah, what you talked about with the Gregorian chants and Arvopar and the DJing, that's so fascinating because you're taking like music and you're extrapolating what you learned from that to then inform how you started to look outside the box when it comes to research and stepping outside the building, you know, and starting to look in from the outside. And that research that you've now settled in Milan to and you're doing and you're working with also became collaborative, right? You
Yeah.
were already working with MySpace Lab
Yeah.
and the INCNR, but you decided you wanted to take part in the nascent creation of the research group NEAR, which stands for Neuroscience plus Architecture, alongside your peers. And I wanted to ask, how was it like to take that initiative, build with others from the ground up this research group? And were there any difficulties or detours you had to take as a team? And what did that teach you about launching a collaborative platform for research with a very distinctive, innovative vision?
So in the past years before NEAR, I was advising colleagues, architects, together with the team to support design choices, grounding them in research with the aim of creating spaces that enhance human experience and well-being. On the other hand, I was also collaborating on the supervision of PhDs, industrial PhDs, that Lombardini 22 started with multiple universities from an industry professional point of view. So it started becoming a lot of work, but it also felt too scattered. So creating NEAR was a way to consolidate everything through a brand new company, which is mainly guided by the two halves, so architects and neuroscientists, but it's also enriched with different disciplines. So in the team, we have a designer, biomedical engineers, computer scientists, communication experts. So, but it was definitely not easy, especially all the bureaucratic and legal part of of this that is common to the creation of all companies. But for me, it was all new. So in that phase, I felt it was really important to find the right people to work with, to trust them, and to be open to collaborate to make things go as fast and smooth as possible. And the other complexity that is still not solved nowadays is to make the two worlds, the one of academia and the one of real estate investments, talk to each other. So it's complex because their time perceptions are completely different, but also their objectives and interests are also very different. So to create a bridge between the two, I feel like it was crucial to be capable of speaking both languages to at least open a discussion.
And to learn to be fluent in those languages, was it a task that each person within the group kind of accrued to then propose this bridge between the two? Or did you have to collect individuals on both sides and have them communicate? How did the group know who to bring into the project and who would be a good fit? Were you trying to like look for one token creative from each field, like data science, neuroscience, architecture? Or was it a group of friends that decided to create this? Or was it Lombardini 22 that kind of initiated this?
Yeah, it was Lombardini 22 that initiated this, and also MySpace Lab. The director of MySpace Lab, Andrea Serino, he's one of the co-founders of NEAR, and he's also very good at communication. So it was really about finding the right people who can communicate with the two worlds, you know. So not the whole team has to be able to do that, but you just need a couple of
You
them.
just need a couple. And would you say you're slowly starting to be familiar with this, or are you still very much on just the architecture, like design, neuroscience side of things?
Yeah, I am.
So those skills you learned from
Yeah.
starting with NE, or did you kind of have that before, working, like in
Um,
firms or
I think it came a bit natural, I think. And
more
then,
natural?
yeah, and then just try, you know,
Mm-hmm.
trial and error.
Mm.
Be ready to accept feedback, to listen, and to learn from older people. Yeah.
Yes. Was there a lesson that you learned from one of the elders when you were starting out that really shaped your approach to your journey?
Well, yes, I really admire Virgil Abloh, actually. Yeah.
Oh, that's,
So,
our guest, like the previous episode, she worked with him for like years.
oh my God,
And when she said it, I was like, what? That's
I
insane.
want to meet this person.
I know. But Virgil
Yeah.
Abloh is so fascinating. He's one of my role models as well. But tell me
Yeah.
more.
Yeah, so I'm really inspired by his vision. And so, one advice that I would give is to let other disciplines contaminating your way of thinking. This is what really helped
Mm.
me throughout these years.
Mm-hmm.
So, Virgil Abloh used to say that he was a tourist in every field that he entered, and he meant it as a strength. So, the tourist asks the question that the expert stopped asking. So, my advice is don't specialize too fast.
Mm.
Stay in the sort of uncomfortable in between longer than feels reasonable, actually. So, the intersection that you're looking for isn't a place you arrive at, but it's practice. So, and I think that you can find it by following what doesn't make sense to you yet. Um, but it really sparkles your curiosity. So trust your guts.
Mm-hmm.
And when you find your snoozelen moment, that thing that really lights you up, that makes you start asking questions, write it down because that is your research question.
Mm. That's gold. I'm so like like inspired now and so in awe of what you just said. I think that's so eye-opening because especially the fact that you said the intersection is not the final point, but it's the practice point. It's where all the activity and all the tumultuous research starts. It's not where it ends.
Yeah.
And finding it can be like an epiphany one day, or it can take years of uncomfortable,
Yeah.
of not knowing. I mean, I think as students nowadays, we always have this idea that we need to find a specialization, find it fast, and start like exploring what's there right away. But sometimes the exploration is done in the meandering of
Exactly.
finding what you want to do. Wow,
Exactly.
I think that's really inspiring. Thank you for sharing that and for sharing also your story and about Near. We'll be right back in the second half to discuss about the projects and how you apply it now to your design. So, see you in a second. Welcome back to the second half of the podcast. And once again, I'm so excited you're here today, Federica, because we have so many more interesting topics to dive into. I mean, the conference, Extreme Environments, I attended last 2 weeks ago now.
Mm-hmm.
And what made it so incredible was that you assembled such a variety of experts in different fields, such as neuroscience, urban planning, architecture, science counseling, and space diplomacy. And you siphoned them into the issue of extreme environments to show us how their application could yield new solutions to design. What drew you to adapt the lens of extreme environments to introduce how using architecture and neuroscience could be a solution to reconceiving the spaces we inhabit?
Yeah, so with extreme environments, we mean all those spaces in which the physical conditions in which humans live are different from ordinary ones and put the mind and the body in challenging conditions. So, one of the most extreme spaces in this case are spaceships. So extreme environments are the best lab for neuroscience applied to architecture because they are honest in a way that ordinary spaces are not.
Mm-hmm.
So they don't let you think that space is neutral. And once you accept that space is never neutral, that it always does something to the person inside of it, you can't unsee that. And so you start asking, if this is true in a space habitat, what's happening in a hospital waiting room, or in a school classroom, or in a corridor someone walks through every day for 20 years? So I think that is why we wanted to talk about extreme environments, because if you think about the logic through which they are designed, then
Mm-hmm.
you start understanding also the need of designing in such a careful way also the spaces that
Right.
we walk around every day.
Mm-hmm. It's like if you can find the balance for a space that's like 2.25 square meters for one person, then we can extrapolate that case and apply it on a larger scale. And that's also very valuable because it inverts this arguably archaic method of first designing and then observing the effects. Here, with these extreme environments, there has to be a methodic, empiric research beforehand, and then we can test that design, which is also key to your application of neuroscience and architecture. And you've coined this ideology, neuroarchitecture, in one word, and its application yields very compelling advancements in what design can be. And so, what are the strengths of this hybrid approach in influencing how humans can interact with space, both cognitively and emotionally?
Architects always had intuition. We know that a certain ceiling height or a certain combination of colors and light can change how people move, that the sequence of a narrow corridor followed by an open room does something to the body. So that knowledge has been in the practice forever, embedded in experience, in the trained eye. So what neuroscience does is that it takes that intuition and make it legible, measurable. The effect that design has on a person, for example, on their stress response, on their attention, on their sense of safety, can be objectively quantified. And that's not a small thing. It means that we can move from this feels right to explain why it feels right. And
Mm-hmm.
here is the evidence. And the real power comes over time. As you collect data across different spaces, different populations, different typologies, we start to see patterns. And you begin to identify which architectural features consistently produce which physiological responses. On the other hand, the strength isn't just scientific precision, though. We have always known that some spaces feel heavy and some feel lighter.
Mm-hmm.
But now we can say why. And once we can say why, we can replicate it, we can scale it, we can teach it. And most importantly, one day we can make it accessible to everyone in society.
Mm. Yeah. That part about putting into data what we've felt intuitively is very powerful. And that topic of spatial cognition and social cognition that is implicit in how we react is really valuable. And I read also in your work that this perception that we intuitively have, influenced by the architecture, is not only affected by the space itself that we're immersed in, but also how we perceive our peers to have processed and reacted, which is really, really fascinating because then we realize there's this sort of mutual, interconnected reaction to space, which is invaluable. But it could arguably also pose some obstacle, and you kind of approached it when you're speaking about collecting a bunch of data, because since our reactions are subjective and, like you said, never neutral, different cultures can elicit different responses or can have different associations to types of space. So it could be hard to generalize this neuroscientific approach. Have there been any considerations for how we can work with this issue? And are there also other possible limits that have to be pushed?
I believe it's necessary to distinguish between layers.
Mm.
So some responses are deeply biological. For example, how the nervous system reacts to threat or to light, to scale, to enclosure. And these are older than culture. They are in our body.
Mm-hmm.
And our biometric methodology, so measuring heart rate, skin conductance, cortisol levels, capture responses at that level before the cultural interpretation intervenes. And this gives you something more universal to work with. Then there is the layer that is more cultural, symbolic, learned, grounded in our memories, in our past. And here we don't even try to generalize. What we have to do is to listen. And that is what makes design interesting then, because let's say we manage to decode all the effects of all architectural archetypes. It's very difficult and will require a huge amount of time, but let's say that in 50 years we manage. If this was enough, we then could train what would be observed, but we could train an AI with all of our discoveries and produce infinite perfect designs that are also scientifically based. But that's not possible because subjectivity is what completes a project.
Right.
So we discovered many, many things, but now we're looking at void.
That's gold. That, yeah, like going beyond the culture into what's innate and primitive within us, I think is so, like, that's the basis, you know, before any of our culture comes into play. And you were speaking about testing and collecting data for different archetypes. If in an ideal world, we could replicate that for future generations, you've started with one so far, which
Yes.
was the pavilion archetype. And you designed this project at the Salone del Mobile in 2024. And could you tell us more about how you implemented neuroscience? At which phases did you implement it? Were there any unexpected outcomes or surprises that could have puzzled you? And how did this design perform compared to an average, traditionally conceived counterpart?
For Salone del Mobile in 2024, we had to redesign the spatial layout of 2 pavilions. And it was an interesting project because it forced us to work inside an existing system, a trade fair, with all the constraints that it implies. Then time pressure, budget, and a very specific kind of visitor with a very specific kind of attention. So we implemented neuroscience in 2 phases. The first was before the design, so using existing literature research on spatial cognition to make decisions about the proportion of pathways, for example, spatial organization, the user experience sequence, the placement of landmarks, everything to make it easier for visitors to navigate, to orient in space, and to avoid getting lost. The second phase was about the experiments, to measure if our hypotheses were correct, were right. So during the design process, we carried out the first experiment in virtual reality, collecting the brain activity through EEG, electroencephalography. So the visitors had to visit the pavilion that we designed, the neuro-informed pavilion, and also a typical grid-based layout. And then finally, when we realized the project, we did the same experiments, but in real world at Salone del Mobile with 130 participants.
Wow.
So in both experiments, we had really good results. So for example, in the VR experiments, the subjects scored 40% better to a memory task in the pavilion that we designed compared to the older one. And something that surprised us was that during the real-world experiment, we also tracked the movement around the pavilion of the participants. And when we were analyze the data of the grid-based layout, we saw that some of them were passing by the same spot over and over again. So at the beginning, we thought that we couldn't use that data because maybe it was collected in the wrong way.
Mm-hmm.
But then when we looked at it better, we understood that it wasn't a mistake in data collection, but it was because the subjects got lost inside the pavilion. So therefore, they were going back over and over to the same spots, not voluntarily.
That holds a lot of good potential. And the fact that also when you propose your pavilion, I guess it was also a sort of wayfinder within the pavilion. Did you see that when you had your pavilion? Did they also circle over the same parts multiple times?
A bit.
But was it less than?
It was less. Yeah, it was much less. Thank God.
You're like, yes,
Yeah.
that worked. And I mean, just out of like curiosity as well, like what parts of the brain do you scan for when you? Do they wear like the specific cap with all the wires attached?
Yeah.
Are you scanning for like? Are you working in the prefrontal cortex, the hippocampus, the amygdala? Which parts of the brain is it?
So we don't scan for a specific part of the brain.
Okay.
We use mainly EEG, electroencephalography, which measures the electrical activity of the brain as a whole through sensors placed on the scalp. And so what it captures is brainwave patterns in real time. So shifts in attention, cognitive load, emotional arousal, moments of stress or calm as a person moves through a space, for example, with the pavilion of Salone del Mobile. So it's not localized to one region. So it's a continuous signal of how the brain is responding to the environment moment by moment in our case. And EEG actually is only one layer. So depending on what we want to understand, we combine it with other sensors also.
Okay.
So for example, heart rate variability tells us essentially whether the body is in a state of tension or recovery. Skin conductance measures micro changes in sweat gland activity, which are involuntarily and directly linked to emotional arousal. So you can't fake these things, you know, it happens before you're even conscious of it. And so what's powerful about combining these signals is that each one captures a different dimension of the experience. So EEG tells us about cognitive and emotional processing. HRV tells you about physiological stress. Skin conductance tells you about the intensity of a reaction. And so together, they give a picture of how an experience is affecting a person.
Wow. To tie it back with just at the very beginning, you were speaking about how your mother was working with patients with autism. Have you tried to test and record these reactions to someone who might have either trauma or a different or a hindering in the way they perceive the space? Has that ever been tested before, or is that something you would like to test to see the difference?
I didn't have the chance to do it yet, but I definitely would like to do it. And going back to extreme environments also, and after I will have designed a spaceship, I would like to bring that same rigor that we apply to space habitats and Antarctic stations into those everyday contexts.
Right.
Because the methodology works precisely when the stakes are high and the margin for error is small. So why don't we apply this way of thinking to hospitals exactly, or to affordable housing, for example? So because that's when neuroscience applied to architecture stops being interesting and starts being necessary.
Right. So that's like the type of space scalar situation you would wish to apply in the future, to kind of move from these extremes where it's crucial to then apply it to normal experiences, but that you also wish to say that it's also as crucial as the extreme environments, that as we go on, as we design for the future, sometimes investing properly in a neuroscientific approach can yield better results in the long run. And is there a future for your field you hope to see grow into? Is there a sort of, do you wish for it to become more generalized or more endorsed or more understood? What's the hopes for that?
Yeah, so if we have understood how the brain responds to space in the most extreme and resource constrained environment imaginable, we have something precise and powerful to bring back to Earth, to the spaces where most people actually live.
Right.
So the knowledge, I believe, shouldn't live only in academic papers or high-end projects, but it should reach the spaces that are designed in series without personalization for people who never get asked what they need. And another direction that I hope for is data. So I want to find ways to make what we measure readable. So not just to scientists, but also to ordinary people who don't do research and can't read a box plot. And so the challenge is to make it scientifically accurate, but also beautiful. But we are already working on that.
That's very exciting. I'm very excited to see what NEAR accomplishes next and what your research also introduces to the world. It's been an honor to have you on the podcast today. Thank you for coming. Is there any way students can find you? Any websites or any places where we can find the crux of the research and to see what's happening?
Yeah, sure. We're launching the website very slowly, but for now you can find us on Instagram.
On Instagram at NEAR
Laboratory. Yes.
Awesome. All right. Thank you once again for being on today. And it was a pleasure. We'll see you in the next episode of Archfolio. Bye, everyone.
Bye.